Hello and welcome to Alchemy Radio, where the only thing we ask of you is that you keep an open mind. My guest today is Ben Gilroy from People for Economic Justice in Ireland. People for Economic Justice was founded in late 2011 by Ben Gilroy, John Squires and a handful of other ordinary people on the ground. Ben and the other founders were all facing negative equity and mortgage debt at the time and could see no real way out from under the massive strain being applied on them from the banks they owed money to. People for Economic Justice is a non-profit and non-political organisation formed to support and educate ordinary people on their right to lawfully challenge the banking institutions. These same banking institutions, as is common knowledge, received a massive bailout in Ireland overnight in September 2011, which saves them from the brink of collapse. This bailout came at the direct expense of the Irish people. The banks have chosen to repay this assistance by forcing homeowners and business owners out onto the street, taking their possessions from them. This is done because of the people's inability to pay back the debts they owe. The inability to do so, of course, stems directly from the bank bailout that sank the country into a deep recession. The aims of People for Economic Justice are to lawfully challenge repossessions of homes, to keep people in their homes, to lawfully challenge all financial debt, to educate people in the lawful challenge of debt, and to support people in difficult situations. So Ben, you're very welcome to Alchemy Radio. How are things?
Good, how's things with you?
Very good, thanks. Can't complain. And for those who might have been, well, I suppose if they're in Ireland living under a rock for the last while, but we've many listeners from around the world. So tell us a little bit about yourself and where you came from and how you've got to where you are now.
Okay, I don't know how far back you want to go.
Well, it's totally up to you, Ben.
Okay, well, I suppose I was in the security business for a long time. I was a bodyguard back in the day when my leg was able to go up over my head.
As you do.
And then I set up a security business myself, doing alarms and stuff like that. And, you know, we did quite okay. We had a business called Housetronics and, you know, successful enough. But, of course, when the downturn in the economy came, I suppose it hit everybody at equal strength, you know. Maybe some did slightly better than others, but, you know, it's swept everybody off their feet, I suppose, and we're not used to it, especially anyone kind of, you know, in their 20s to 25 to 30 years of age, because they probably were just starting to work as the bad 80s were going out, and, you know, they probably know nothing but good times, so probably a slap in the face for everyone, you know.
Yeah.
Some people said maybe we needed it, you know, we were running away with ourselves as well.
Well, there is that argument, and some people say that well, I suppose the recession has sent Ireland back to the roots. Personally, I don't fully agree, but I kind of know where maybe they might.
Yeah, I know where they were coming from. You know, some people lost maybe some of the nicer stuff that we were kind of known for. I'm not sure if that kind of had anything to do with you know, money or whatever, but just I think generally societies can lose that a little bit, you know. But, you know, poverty, I suppose, is a great leveler for people, you know, and maybe we just forgot a little bit about what's important in life, you know. Maybe we just forgot a little bit of that, you know.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, in our society, we're always told to better ourselves. So, you know, there's no harm in doing that. You know, now of course, we're told we all went mad. I don't agree with that either, you know. I think, you know, I would always tell my children to try and better themselves, no matter what. I mean, sure, if that's not your object in life, I don't know what is.
Absolutely, and as we know, I mean, Ireland hit recession pretty hard from about 2008 onwards.
Yeah.
And we heard all the media stories, as people did around the world. It's a global thing, it's not just an Irish thing, but Irish people have been hit particularly hard, and I think one of the reasons, Ben, and maybe you'll disagree with me on this, is that our government and successive governments now seem to be absolutely at the behest of Europe and World Bank, IMF, etc., and that has really sent things spiralling very, very quickly for us in comparison to many other places around the world.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Obviously, I won't agree with you or disagree with you because people may not know that we actually have a court case against the government for doing that, because we were doing quite well until our government decided to bail out the commercial banks. And it was a disastrous thing to do because, you know, the debt was passed on to the people, the sovereign people of this country, and it didn't benefit the people in any way. So, I mean, it was a disastrous thing to do. The government didn't have a mandate to do it, and that's why it hit our country probably worse than most. So we have a court case defending against the Taoiseach and the Minister of Finance. A lot of people kind of don't know that, and we're waiting now maybe till the next bailout fund is announced, whatever the next payment is to be. And if we're prepared, we'll go in with an injunction into the High Court to try and stop that payment, or maybe the next payment after that if we're not prepared. But we have done the summons to court for the Taoiseach and the Minister for Finance, and the Chief State Solicitor is defending both of them. So it's one to watch.
So tell us a little bit about that, Ben, because for anyone uninitiated, I mean, surely you can't just take the leader of this country to court just because you're unhappy with him, or can you?
Well, you can. I mean, first of all, you have to prove you've got what's called locus standi. You know, it's basically legal standing or standing in the case. So, I mean, because not everybody can sue everybody for anything. So, I mean, if somebody has a car crash on the road, you can't just go out and think, oh, she's got whiplash, I think I'll sue for that.
Yeah.
So that'd be crazy. But you see, in our country, we used to have in our first constitution the right to call a referendum if you were unhappy with something. And you had to get a certain amount of votes. I think it was 75,000 votes or 70,000 votes. Now, if that was an avenue that was open to me today, and it's an avenue that our forefathers left us, you know, if that avenue was open to me today, that's an avenue I would have explored rather than the courtroom.
Okay. Because
I think I could have got them signatures in a weekend. If I had a table outside the GPO in Dublin and say O'Connell Street in Limerick and Patrick Street there in Cork and over in Eyre Square in Galway, I think I would have got them signatures over the weekend, because it just would have had big banners at the table, please sign up to stop the bailout. You know, and I think I would have got the signatures to call a referendum.
I think you would have got them even quicker.
So that facility is taken away from us. Also in this country you're not allowed to do a class action. And then so the only thing you can do is bring the government to court. And at that stage you have to try and prove that you have locus standi. In other words, that you are directly affected. So I have a young family here. My business is gone. We're, I suppose, under threat of losing our homes, like a lot of people.
Yep.
And also the sovereign money they're wasting, the way I look at it is, it's our children's inheritance from our forefathers and from their own fathers, from the blood, sweat and tears of all workers in this country. So that's why I'm hoping will give me locus standi. Michael Crossie had a case against the government and he proved he had locus standi, so I'll be going down them sort of tracks. I have the actual statement of claim in front of me if you'd like me to read a couple of the points. That
absolutely, yeah. I think that would enlighten many of us, yeah.
Okay, well, this here is what's called plenary summons, and on that you just do the basic outline of the claim, of what you're claiming.
Okay.
And then the government have now asked us, or the Chief State Solicitor has asked us for a full statement of claim. So in that we go through all these points and facts, and, you know, if we want to prove, you know, have documentary evidence, or if we want to bring witnesses, we name them all here. So the first thing is that I have said on our claim is, the first point is the actions of Taoiseach and the Minister of Finance in paying back unsecured debts to private banks whom took part in illegal activities is repugnant to the Constitution of Ireland. So that's my first point, and I don't think anybody they'll have a hard job disproving that. I mean, because anybody who knows anything about banking, I mean, the illegal activities I can prove, because there's 5 years in prison for breaking the serious liquidity laws that the banks are supposed to uphold in this country. Mm-hmm. And the mere fact that banks got bailed out means they broke the liquidity law, because the liquidity law is about keeping the bank liquid. In other words, having cash flow.
Yeah.
And if they needed a bailout, where we had to have a serious meeting during the night to bail out several of them, obviously they broke liquidity laws. Number 2 on it is the said actions are a violation of the Constitution, as this action was convened during a night meeting with members of the last Fianna Fáil government without the full support or knowledge of the Cabinet or Senate. So again, you know, to do something like that, you would need all members informed. Number 3, it says it is also against best practices of international law, as it is an odious debt, because it was taken on by a Fianna Fáil regime that at best had a dubious leader, and corrupt members, as outlined in the Mahon Tribunal, at a cost to the state in excess of €500 million, and it did not benefit the people. Instead, has become one of the most taxing debts ever incurred since the formation of the state. Now, odious debt is a thing defined in UN law. and basically says any debt taken on by any regime in the country, if it didn't directly benefit the people, then it should not be paid back. And not only that, within that law, there's warnings to the people who actually put up the money that they should have no expectation of being paid back, as it's classed odious debt under UN law. So if anyone can show us then how the people have directly benefited from bailing out the bondholders, I'd love to see that.
Well, I think it's blatantly obvious that we haven't, and the contrary has been the case.
I mean, we're being taxed now on our water. I mean, basic human rights now are being taxed on water, your home, and sewerage. I mean, these are basic human rights that we have.
Incredible.
And you can't tax a basic human right. The number 4 point that I have on this is the defendants do not have a mandate from the people of Ireland for such actions, but they have put the promises made to the people second in favour of promises made to a banking system. So basically, they don't have a mandate from the people, because I have video footage of Enda Kenny. There's a famous one, Brad Carr saying not 1 cent more or not 1 red cent more or something to that effect. So this is what they were singing from the hymn sheet on the way into government. And the minute going into government, a complete U-turn. And people say to me, oh Ben, sure, look at, politicians always lie. Well, I'm sorry, this is one of the most taxing and serious times that ever hit our country. And to go in lying at that point on exactly how you're going to handle that and then do a complete U-turn, I'm sorry, we don't have to accept that.
I agree, and I suppose politicians would argue that they have a mandate from the people because they've been elected. But the point you're making there, which I think is a salient point, is that because they lied, and it is proven now at this point, with the benefit of hindsight, that they did lie in order to get elected, well, that removes, I suppose, tacitly that any consent that was given or any mandate,
Yeah, well, the mandate is really, the mandate is more than your vote to get them in. If I say to you, well, vote for me, and then you vote for me and I'm in, I didn't actually give you a mandate per se, in the sense that you didn't ask. So, if I asked you to give me a vote, and you said, oh, right, Ben, well, what do you stand for? What are you going to do? And I said to you, well, I'm definitely not going to do this, Now, people say to me, Ben, you can't be that naive as to think politicians don't lie. Of course they lie, and they lie all the time. But I think, when it's, I think at all times they shouldn't be lying, full stop. But I mean, it might be okay maybe that it wasn't quite a lie. They said they'd do a school bus run and they just weren't able to do it. Their intent might have been quite good.
Yeah.
But for such a thing that has been a disaster for this country since the foundation of the state, I know of no other financial disaster since the foundation of this state as big as this. And you cannot go into government lying about how you're going to handle it, because the whole country was distraught, because we were doing quite well until our Fianna Fáil government said they were going to bail these guys out. Mm-hmm. And then when you're making promises that not 1 red cent are they going to get, and that's the mandate you go in on, and then you actually do worse than Fianna Fáil, because now you're taxing more to pay them back more. I mean, at that stage you do not have a mandate from the people, because nobody voted for this government to do that.
Exactly.
So they don't have a mandate from the people, because I certainly didn't vote for them to do that.
Yeah, and that I suppose brings us on then to the next point on your statement.
Yeah, this is one that's kind of worded by an American guy who's helping us, and he's well up on currencies and all. I don't know if you know him. Just trying to think of his name now, but Mike, anyway, this is his first name. I can't think of his second name. Okay. But it says here, the debt precipitates from an insoluble obfuscation of the currency, which perpetually multiplies debt upon the populace in such a way that eventually we the people can only suffer a terminal sum of debt, which makes it mathematically impossible even to maintain a vital circulation thereafter. Now, remember we wrote this some 9 months ago, and you can clearly see that we're actually heading for a terminal sum of debt, which makes it mathematically impossible to maintain even a vital circulation.
Yeah.
And you can actually see that, businesses on the high streets are, starting to die. You'll see an awful lot of them boarded up in all the towns around the country. Receivers are moving in everywhere. Suicides are up to 2 a day. The farming community are having tractors and farms repossessed. I mean, you can just see what we predicted 9 months ago actually happening. So how they're going to disprove that one in court, I just do not know, because you've only to look out the court window, or actually, in fact, look inside the court. Because every day when I'm in the courts, and I just see the number of banks looking for repossession of houses, machinery, whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
So that's going to be hard. Number 6 on it was receiving bailouts from member states of the European Union or the European Central Bank to pay back private corporations is in conflict with the Lisbon Treaty. Again, we will be mentioning the exact sections in the treaty for that. So, you know, and remember, this is the Lisbon Treaty that they asked us to vote on, and when we did, they said, sorry, wrong answer, we'll ask again.
Yeah.
I always think what they should have done was at least give us best of 3. I mean, if I was tossing a coin with you and it was heads and I'd go again and I got halves, you'd at least be fair with me and go best out of 3.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, for anybody who might have voted no the first time and then they're told to vote again, and just because a yes came up, well, as you say, I mean, that's evens, but you'll never see them put it, when they get the result they want, they'll never put it to us again. Of
course, but I'm always very dubious about that election. You know, because anyone I spoke to who was voting no to the Lisbon, and then I spoke to obviously some people who were voting yes. When I spoke to the yes people after that vote, they said when the next election came, they were definitely voting no.
Yeah.
Because they just said, like, you know, fair it's fair, we lost the election and we're asking you again. So they went against it even. And of course the people who voted no were disgusted, so they were really no. I said no, so no means no. So I don't know how that election was passed. I'm very dubious about that.
Well, I think a lot of people are, because anecdotally, and any kind of surveys that were carried out, almost everybody, certainly who I spoke to and people who I know and have interviewed on this show who spoke to people about it, they know practically nobody who voted for a yes. So unless it was people saying they were voting no and suddenly going into the ballot box and voting yes, there seems to be something afoot there. And I mean, basically the thing was passed in the end without a whimper.
Yeah, no, and I don't believe it for a minute. And, you know, a lot of people should maybe YouTube Nigel Farage and look up Respect the Irish Vote. Now, this guy is from the UK Independence Party. And you'll see them all with green T-shirts in the EU Commission over there in Brussels. And they all wore green T-shirts with Respect the Irish Vote, and they were chuffed because your man is very anti this. Well, he knew Europeans were going to be just turning into a big European bank, and you have private corporations then running our country.
Yeah.
And you can actually see it. I mean, it's a very dangerous road we're on now.
Well, it is, and it's a corporatocracy we're living in as opposed to a true democracy.
There's no question about it. I mean, we'll all be going around with little logos now tattooed on our arms soon if we don't stop. And when you have banks dictating the policy of a sovereign country, I mean, like, how did that happen? Like, that happened obviously when we were asleep. I mean, like, our fathers and our forefathers would be turning in their grave when you think of the bloodshed and everything in this country to gain our independence, and less than a lifetime, less than a generation, we have now corporate banks running the country. I mean, what's the point in voting? I mean, at least let's vote for the corporation. Let Coca-Cola put themselves on the ballot, and Bank of Ireland and Deutsche Bank, and vote for your best bank to run the country. Because that's what we're just short of doing.
Well, that's right. And this leads on to a question, Ben. Do you think then that politics and the system that we have at the moment is a futile exercise, and that we're presented with just a kind of a left-right paradigm, and we're given the illusion of choice as opposed to a real choice? Because let's face it, no matter who you vote for in this country at any given election, you're voting for, I suppose, a different side of the same coin, because they are in the pockets of big business.
I keep saying that. Look, it's Tweedledum or Tweedledee. And, you know, we really have to get away from that type of politics. Now, I'm trying to start with a number of people around the country a political party, and I know most people are going to switch off at this point because it's such a snore fest, and I agree with them. And the word politics sometimes gets stuck in my throat, because normally anybody from my age group to younger, the minute you hear politics, you may as well be hearing crime, deception, fraud, because it's like they're all the same adjective.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, so I know exactly what it means. But what we're trying to do is, first of all, we're starting up a political party called Direct Democracy Ireland. We have a number of groups around the country who have very kindly donated offices and members and everything else around the country. And what Direct Democracy is basically, I can only talk from the 70s on, when I was sort of, I suppose, old enough to recognise what was going on at a young age. And now it's probably gone on since the 1932 or 22 even, you know.
Yeah.
But my impression of politics was that, you know, it was never, the government never were in power for the people. They were in power for vested groups, you know, vested interest groups, lobby groups, corporations, oil companies, whatever else it was. And, you know, what you were really voting for was a government that would promise you a little less tax and a little less this, you know, little sweeteners. Mm-hmm. But actually the actual running of the government was not for the people, you know. So direct democracy, when our forefathers wrote the first constitution, the Articles 47 and 48 were removed from the constitution. And that's why when you were saying to me, like, God, you're taking the government to court, there is no other route for me. Articles 47 and 48 were removed from the Constitution, and they were the right to referendum. So our political party wants to basically put that back into the Constitution for starters. Yeah. Because vested groups and corporate governments would have recognised that as a huge stumbling block. So that was the first thing that was removed, and that should be your clue. That if they remove something really quickly, that should be your clue. Now remember, they removed it from the Constitution without a referendum, and it was quite sneakily done.
And how was that done then?
Well, what they did was they said they had the right to remove an article, you know, in emergency cases, but only temporarily for 7 years. So they removed it for 7 years, and then they extended it for another 7 years. And then I suppose, you know, the country was new, was probably doing okay. And then when the Constitution, I think, came out in 1932, I think my figures are right there, 1932, they basically said to the people that the government retained the right of referendum. And you see, it's all magic of words. Yeah. Retaining the right of referendum. They didn't have it to retain in the first place. You see? Well, that's it. Surely it was the people's right. Exactly. But word magic is terrific. Like, even if you take the latest thing we voted on there, the fiscal treaty, okay? Now, when they were talking about this fiscal treaty first, they kept referring to the fiscal treaty this and the fiscal treaty that, and that's all I remember hearing. And of course, most people probably didn't look up fiscal. When you look up fiscal, you see it's basically tax or taxing, okay? Yeah. So as more people copped on with fiscal, you'll see they started to rebrand it then as the stability agreement. Do you remember that? Well, that's it. And I mean, the word stability in itself, so what does that evoke? Ben Gilroy and his cronies, I mean, if we were against stability, we would have to be mad, wouldn't we? Exactly. We were against taxing more, right? But of course then we couldn't say anything because we would have been against stability. And this is and you know, I don't know what it is about nations as a whole, you know. You can't fool one man on his own too easy, but there's something about a large group of people that you can just seem to fool easy. And I do notice this quite a lot, even about, say, you know, speed cameras, when they were called speed cameras, you know. There was objections and blah, blah, blah. But then the minute they start calling them safety cameras, you see, all of a sudden you couldn't be against it because, you know, they're for safety, you know, they might save a child's life and all. And they're really just tax collecting cameras. I mean, let's be honest. Wordplay, you know, and that's why I'm not advocating dangerous driving or anything, that, you know that. But I'm just saying, you know, we need to tap on to this sort of word magic that just drives me crazy, you know. I kind of shoot for the dip, and I know I probably get into trouble now and again for doing that, but at least I call a spade, and you don't have to ask me twice about something, you know, just say it and that's it. So I hate this sort of word magic and word play that we do, you know, with fiscal becoming, you know, stability and this sort of stuff. So our main objection is our objective, should I say, is to bring around direct democracy. And as I say, direct democracy is where democracy, and it was real democracy, and our country has not seen real democracy, certainly in my lifetime. Now, people say to me, oh, democracy, you have a vote. Yeah. And that's the thing that they brainwash in school, to think that if you have a vote, it must be democracy. But that's not democracy at all, because democracy is not about having a vote, it's about having a say. See, we all had a vote, but none of us had a say. Because I've never met one person in this country yet that's happy with paying out these gamblers who took a gamble on the stock exchange. The interest rate at the time reflected the risk, if you like, and then when their horse fell, we all had to bail them out.
And it is quite astonishing because it's that simple, Ben. I mean, if I go into a bookies and I bet on a horse or a soccer team or whatever it might be, and the horse doesn't come in for me or the team loses, well,
yes, I mean, it is. And while I would prefer to bail you out because you seem like these people were faceless to me.
So, Ben, I will come back to direct democracy and indeed the political party, but I want to just, I suppose, finish up discussing the court case. And when can we expect to hear more about this, or do we have any kind of dates? Because no doubt we're not going to hear too much about it in the mainstream media.
Yeah, although I think it'll be a big enough story that they'll have to cover it. Do you know what I mean? Because if we are successful with the injunction, then it's going to awful egg on their faces. So I think they will have some press coverage. RT will try, bury it as something ridiculous, because that's, RT is the spokesman for the government. So I mean, once you know that and know where, like what pulpit everybody's singing from, you'll get an idea of what's going on. Mm-hmm. So the last couple of points are just small ones. Receiving bailouts from member states. Oh, I said that was in conflict of the Lisbon Treaty.
Yeah.
Number 7, I have the winding down of Anglo-Irish Bank is in direct conflict with the Minister of Finance's own law in the the Anglo-Irish Bank Corporation Act 2009, which states that the bank is to be kept as a going concern. Now, I thought this was hilarious. The ink wasn't dry on this act that I was reading, and I seen them screwing the name of Anglo-Irish down off the wall on the news. I mean, you couldn't make this up, and it's in their own act that it's to be kept as a going concern. The last thing then we want to do is examine the breach of trust between the government and the people, because trust law is the highest law going, and the government are the trustees of the state, and we are supposed to be the beneficiaries.
Well, let's face it, there isn't an ounce of trust at this stage.
Well, not of course there isn't. And not only that, did you ever feel like a beneficiary of the state?
Absolutely not. They want
us
as debtors.
Like, I always keep telling these people, and like, a lot of people kind of think, God, that's the craziest thing I ever heard. But, research it. The two most richest countries in Europe in natural resources, can you name them?
I would go personally for Norway and Ireland.
You're close, but it's Greece and Ireland.
Okay, well, they're Greece.
And that makes it even more extraordinary, doesn't it?
It certainly does, in light of what we see every day of the week in Greece.
Yeah, so, I mean, so we have huge natural resources here. From, first of all, our fishing, I mean, it's gone. We had the best fishing rights probably in the world, and they were worth billions every year, and they're gone. Not to mention our wind energy, our gas and oil rights, and we're rich in oil and gas, and you'll see it over the next few years. Our mining rights, Tara Mines, takes out 2 train loads of zinc every day out of this country, and all I think we get from us is just the tax, that's all. No profits, no nothing else, just whatever tax is on it, that's all. So we're not the beneficiaries of this earth that we call Ireland here. The states may be a different corporation sort of thing, but we are not the beneficiaries. We should be. I mean, the government are put in basically in trust law. They are the trustees, and trust law is the highest law. And the citizens of the states are basically supposed to be the beneficiaries.
So let's backtrack a little bit there, Ben, because I'm left reeling here. I mean, you're trying to tell me that we've the best fishing and we've the best mining and we've all these natural resources and we've just given them away. When I say we, the government,
and the excuse was to the corporate bodies was that we didn't have the expertise to run them.
So let's just rather than get somebody who does have the expertise and learn from them, let's just give them away. That's the attitude.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, one of the actual oil fields was sold for €1 or £1, I think it was at the time, because it had to be done on paper, so they had to put in a nominal figure. And what we hope to do with direct democracy is to re-look at all these contracts, because the people themselves of this state can make up laws, and we can retrospect laws. We can do anything we want in this state that we wish. And basically, if these natural resources were sold or conned out of us in any way, and there was a breach of trust, then we can revisit them contracts and certainly have a look at them in law. And I don't think many of the contracts that we got done would stand up in any law. Because nothing is open or in the public, and that's what we want with direct democracy too, that all tenders, you see, we say public tender in this country, and it's not public. What we know to understand in this country when we say public tender means anybody out in the public can tender, right? Yeah. But it's still a private tender in the sense that you never know who got it, why they got it, how much it was. Okay. Do you understand? So public tender to me would mean all cards on the table. Everybody knows who tendered, everybody knows how much they tendered for, everybody knows who got it and the reasons why they got it.
Because you do hear anecdotally when the state puts out to public tender for, let's say, to build a road, for argument's sake, and you have a company in Cork who will give a quote of 100 million and your company in Dublin and they'll quote 112 million, yet quite often it's a company from the UK or the US or wherever it might be who would have put in a quote for 250 million who get the actual contract. Exactly, because the government is getting a larger slice off that. Right. Through back payments or something. And that's why, like, if you take Switzerland, for instance, right? Switzerland has direct democracy. Now, I wouldn't wish the Swiss on us, and I don't mean to insult any of our Swiss friends that may be listening, or not would I wish us on the Swiss. We're different people, different backgrounds, everything else. But the Swiss have direct democracy and have it for the last, God knows, 800 years or something. But they're one of the richest countries in the world. They're one of the safest countries in the world. Their banks are probably one of the safest. That's why everybody keeps their gold there. Yeah. They have the highest standard of living, probably in the world, definitely in Europe, but probably in the world, and their services are probably the best in the world. I mean, you can eat your food off the streets over there because they have a real sense of owning the place, you know, because they have a direct say in everything. Now, in Switzerland, with all these great services and everything they have, they spend something like 36% of their GDP. Okay? Yeah. Now you take that in relation to Ireland. Ireland, our services used to be good. We won't complain about everything. Our roads are terrific and stuff like that. But in general, our health services now and a lot of our other services are second rate at best. Mm-hmm. And we pay almost 68% of our GDP on our services. Now, you know, I try to explain to people that, you know, we've gone so immune to it because we don't have a sense of actual ownership in this country. You know, citizens don't. So when we see something being, you know, being graffitied or bus shelters being broken, or we don't care. We don't have a sense of ownership. We don't have a sense that it's coming out of our pockets, you know, where the Swiss do. And that's why I think they spend their money wisely. Now, I was only explaining to someone the other day that we seen in the newspaper that there was 2 light bulbs changing the Garda station and it cost us €1,600. Now, you know... How can that be?
Look, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of light bulb jokes we could tell here.
So are we looking at a situation where there's so much middle management or layers of bureaucracy that it's just... It's not just...
I mean, that has to be what it is. Now, I tell you what drove me insane when I started this sort of crusade, and I hope I don't drive people mad, but, you know, I used to go and see TVs, you see, and because I lived in the real world with a real company and that, so when a guy came to me with a problem, and he said, Ben, I have a problem, I need 2 security cameras put up there, and I need to be able to watch them at home on my TV. Yeah. I'd say, okay. And the next morning I'd order the stuff, and we'd get the guys, and we'd get the tools, and we'd go and do it, and it was done the next day. Okay? Now, when I go to people in government and I say, look, this needs to be done, okay, well, you know what we'll do now? We'll call a committee, right? This is the great term. We'll get a committee, and then a subcommittee, and then a review committee, and then this could go on for months about something that's really serious. And maybe it's me, you know, maybe it is me, but I mean, I just don't see that as a way to do something. I remember years ago when I was a kid, I was in this priest's office one time, and I just remembered this sign on his wall, and it said, God so loved the earth that he didn't send a committee.
Well, it says it all.
I just thought that was really good, like, you know. So that's what the nonsense drives me insane. And there's always these tribunals and committees. And somebody handed me a book the other day about corruption in Irish politics from 1922. And oh my God, it's like an encyclopedia. And it talks about these tribunals that I even forgot about. You know, about do you remember the meat tribunal and all this sort of stuff, and the angel dust and and all the money that costs. Even the Mahon Tribunal, as I mentioned earlier on, cost 500 million. I mean, you know, look at all the solicitors and all that just became millionaires on the, you know, this terrible thing that happened in our country. And, you know, I just, if you notice with county councils and stuff like that, you'll notice coming to Christmas time, there's always roadworks. And the guy in the council told me out the straight, this is the sort of nonsense that we have to waste money in this country, that in this state apparently, that if councils don't use up their quota of whatever budget they had for the year, and they're actually left with an excess, they won't get as much the following year.
Yeah, that's
right.
True.
So they just dig roads for the sake of them, or patch up roads, or whatever they do. But this to me, it sounds ridiculous, because I'm thinking to myself, like, if you were running a business, you would reward people with the amount of money to hand it back every year.
Of course.
And you would promise them a bigger budget the following year. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a nonsense. Now, I'll give you an example of something. We were talking about this, and one of the actual days during the summer, it was lashing rain. I know that was nearly every day of the summer, but the council in Meath obviously had a budget, and they obviously, you know, work it out what has to be spent where. Now, because, again, I, like most people, live in the real world, I found this extraordinary. And yet, I noticed people walking by and they didn't even seem to notice, right? And I'll tell you what was happening. The council were out watering the plants while it was absolutely belting down with rain.
Well, it's amazing you say that, Ben, because I experienced that in Carlow, where I live, about 3 weeks ago. Not once, but twice in the same day, with the same flowers on a day it was lashing rain, and the flowers were dead.
Now, but that's the point, right? So my thing is that if you can't notice that, I mean, say I'm the manager of the council even, and I don't notice that glaring something waste of money. I mean, and we're talking just a low-level thing about watering plants, but I mean, if you don't notice it at that level, I mean, imagine the wastage that goes on at the very top level when we talk about selling oil fields and stuff like that. And I mean, you know, I just don't know. I don't know, just staring out. And we videoed it on the phone for anybody who doesn't believe it. We might actually put it up on the website. Because we were looking at it and there was people walking by and nobody noticed. And I really think that's why we are actually, with the word politics, as I said, you get stuck in my throat sometimes, because we are so removed from it now. I think that's where they want us, you know, just it's poison, it's nothing to do with us, you know. And we're so removed from money being spent by government, that we're so removed from government, or we see them so removed from us, or there's such a gaping gap between the citizens and government in this country that, you know, the government is supposed to be our servants, as I say, they're supposed to be the trustees of our account.
Yeah.
And, you know, we obviously don't feel like that. Because if that was happening in Switzerland, there would be phone calls to beat the band. You'd get some old woman hitting the guy with a brolly and telling him to get in off the road. I think really that's the problem. I mean, that's just, I know it's only a small thing, but it actually highlighted the problem in this country so much that, you know, people didn't actually notice it.
And it comes back to that sense of ownership or sense of pride that you described with the Swiss that we don't seem to have. So be it graffiti or be it somebody wasting money or public resources or whatever it is. And when people hear about maybe, I don't know, millions being given to bondholders, they can't really equate that. The figures are so large, it's almost like a different language to them. Whereas,
yeah, that's right. Well, you see, when I was going to school, I'm not sure if we talked about billions. We certainly talked about millions. I remember there was 6 zeros in it, so billions. And I know there's a difference between a UK billion and an American billion.
Yeah.
But we never talked in them figures. And like, you know the big hangar up at Dublin Airport? We're talking about that, full of suitcases, full of £50 notes or €50 notes. I mean, that's the sort of figures we're talking about. No wonder no one can comprehend that amount of money being wasted. And remember, this was just on a horse that ran that we didn't even put the money on. And if that horse had won, we weren't even going to gain from it. I mean, these people don't share their profits with the country. So, we shouldn't be sharing the losses. And not only are we, I don't mean not sharing the losses, we just picked up the loss. And, these guys who made these investments, at best they would have hoped to get maybe 52 cents to the euro or 58 cents to the euro. That would have been quite good. Our government is paying them 100%. They would have never have got that in their wildest dreams, even if their horse had have won.
And all the while people are committing suicide, and they're being driven from their homes and farms and properties, and their lives are becoming more and more miserable, and obviously more miserable as weeks and months go on in Ireland at the moment.
Of course. That just brings me on to another thing that I don't know if you noticed our letters to the lotto on our website.
That's right, yeah, on peopleforeconomicjustice.com if anyone wants to check them out.
I tell you what happened there is a number of farmers and business people around the country had made several complaints to us about KPMG when we did a demonstration outside Savills receivers because they were moving in on Irish farms and businesses. And we had a demonstration, and then we got an awful lot of complaints from people around the country talking about KPMG. And I've had several meetings with KPMG, and while some of the people that I meet with are nice, genuine people, in general I have to say that most of them are absolute corporate thugs. Now, we were recording one conversation of a meeting I went in because, I always try and do that for evidence. And I was recording the meeting, and I asked, because this man that we brought in, a businessman, was nearly suicidal, and when I brought him into the meeting with KPMG, there's law cases that prove the receiver has an equitable duty of care and good faith to the person they're receiving the property from.
Yeah.
And I just mentioned to the guy in the duty of good faith and duty of care, and he was saying, look, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you have a duty of care to this man. And he goes, look, I don't give two hoots about his duty of care, okay? And I said, that's great, because this is recorded. And then he starts to backtrack. Then, well, I didn't mean it that way, and I didn't mean it that way. And I said, listen, mate, you ain't going to bully me around, because I'll do what it takes, and I don't care. I mean, I won't break the law, but I'll do what it takes to get things done, because I'm just sick of this country and the way we allow our citizens to be treated. So we had several complaints anyway about KPMG after we did the protest outside Savills, because people were saying to us that we really should have been protesting outside the KPMG first. They felt they were worse. And then they were also disgusted about the lottery, because I don't do the lotto and I didn't really notice it myself, but because we had so many complaints, I watched it one night, and they make some reference to our advisors or our independent auditors or something like that, KPMG. Now, the thing that was put to us was that KPMG are one of the most aggressive receivers. So you have a guy who's in big money trouble, and what he wants to do was, dream a little. This is the way the lotto kind of even sells it to you. I don't know if anyone genuinely really believes we'll ever win the lotto, but it's nice to dream, and we always, buy the ticket and we think, what would you do with the winnings, and I do this and I do that. And that's part of the, I suppose, charm of the lotto,
Yeah.
You can forget about your worries for them few hours.
Well, that's their sales pitch.
Yeah, and they're sort of like a rehab organisation in the sense that they do a lot of good work as well. I don't want to knock the lottery either. But so anyway, the problem then that we had was that they were saying that while they were dreaming a little, and then they just, this thing about KPMG would come up, their heart would sink and go, they're coming to me next week, or they're down in me farm, or they're moving into me business, And for them few minutes that they were trying to dream about it, it turned into a nightmare again for them. And when we've travelled around the country, we've had things called suicide watch. Have you heard of this? Groups of men?
I have, yeah. Tell us a bit about that.
I thought this was terrible when I was learning about this. There's actually groups of men going around watching other men in things called suicide watches because of the troubles that people are in.
Yeah.
And also, what they're also doing then is the suicide watch people, if they think the banks are moving in or whatever like this, they'll try and, call regularly to the person and phone them regularly without letting them really know or checking up on them.
Yeah.
So we wrote a letter to Dermot Griffin, the CEO of National Lottery, And if you want, I'll read it out here.
Yeah, by all means.
In front of me. I'll just read it quickly, and it's not too long-winded. It just says, "Dear Sir, I'd like to make it known to you and your organisation of the absolute disgust that the people all over the country portray to us in regards of the National Lottery." Now, this is written under the heading of People for Economic Justice.
Yeah.
It says, "The source of this comes from your decision to have KPMG as your advisor accountants. I'm not sure if you know, but KPMG are one of the most aggressive receivers in the country, and there seems to be no reasoning with them, as I have personally attended meetings with their agents to try to come to some sort of reasonable solution that may be acceptable to the bank. And I have always found them aggressive and not tuned into the desperation of the person whose business is failing. When I've asked one of their agents at a meeting in KPMG head office about a duty of care to the business owner, his reply was, 'I don't give a toss about my duty of care.' I must say I was disgusted with his attitude," and then I have in brackets audio recording of meeting available. And I said, "KPMG are moving in on farms and businesses all over the country. With banking fraud and greed and deception rife, and the eventual forcing of the good people of this state to bail out the very banks and bankers who now show no remorse to their agents, and KPMG showing even less, it galls the Irish people to see them now involved with the lotto, which is largely recognised as doing good work. The Samaritans organisation has told the papers that helplines are under pressure with massive volumes of calls. They take one call every 5 seconds, and every 57 seconds someone calls the Samaritans with suicidal feelings. The majority callers are men in their 30s, and as the recession deepens, Ireland's suicide rate now stands at a shocking 600 deaths per year, and experts believe the figure is rising as the country experiences the pain of recession. A well-orchestrated recession, I might add. So that was my own little dig. It says the National Suicide Research Foundation's director, Paul Corcoran, said, "The findings are not a coincidence. There's a clear evidence that the recession has impacted on the rate of suicide behaviour in Ireland." So then I said, "I now ask you on behalf of People for Economic Justice to terminate all contact with these vultures who hover over the carcasses of dying businesses that their employers help to poison and kill, while KPMG seem intent on finishing off the owners." So that's a letter we sent, and then the reply we got back.
Oh, so you did get a reply?
We actually did get a reply, and we got a prompt reply. You know, I don't think it took days, because a few people said we probably wouldn't get a reply, but we actually did. And in fairness to the guy sending it, it just says here, "Dear Mr. Gilroy, thank you for your recent correspondence in relation to the National Lottery's independent auditors, KPMG." He said the company KPMG were appointed as independent auditors for the National Lottery through a public procurement process. In accordance with public procurement guidelines, the invitation to tender for this contract was advertised on etenders.gov.ie and was open to interested auditing companies in the European Union. KPMG was selected as the most economically advantageous tender of those received. The National Lottery has entered a contract with KPMG for its services. Our relationships with all our suppliers are governed by contractual terms. KPMG has consistently met all the contractual obligations to the National Lottery. I understand from your letter that you are dissatisfied in your dealings with KPMG, and I would suggest that you contact KPMG directly to convey your concerns. Now, I won't tell you what somebody said on Facebook about, if you read between the lines, what that really means.
Well, what strikes me there straight away, Ben, is he hasn't addressed anything that you brought up in your initial letter.
Exactly. I mean, you know, it was a fob off. No. So my reply then, you see, because it didn't come from Dermot Griffin, the CEO, in fairness, it came from a guy called Declan.
Yeah.
So I just said, "Dear Declan, thank you for your prompt reply. I must say that it was quite a cold corporate response to what was a true human tragic concern of one of the causes of suicide. I'm a bit disappointed that Mr. Griffin, to whom the letter was addressed, couldn't take time to reply to the concerns raised by many people around the country. Declan, as head of finance, I'm not really sure why the grave concerns of a growing number of discontented people around the country should fall in your remit. While I don't want to seem ungrateful for a reply, I wasn't asking anything about your finances. Your letter describes the way one tenders for the position that KPMG now hold. My letter merely complained of who they are and the practices they conduct around the country. The letter states that you have a contract with KPMG and they meet their contractual obligations. The inference is to be taken that once they do what they are paid to do, it is of no concern to your company what they do or how they act to your customers the length and breadth of the country. I am reminded of the legal maxim, he who contracts knows or ought to know the quality of the person with whom he contracts, otherwise he is not excusable. Perhaps in the future your company will choose more wisely when contracting with companies like KPMG and won't only consider the most economically advantageous company, because in the long run they may turn out to be the most costly for all of us. So I don't think we'll get a response to that, but I mean, at least it just made our feelings known about, you know, where they are. Controversy now on Facebook about it. Well, not really a controversy, I suppose, more a glowing recommendation of what we were doing. And I was a little bit surprised by the response of the Lotto, you know, because they are quite, you know, they are quite involved with a lot of charitable organisations, and I'm sure that, you know, they probably do fund Suicide Watch and stuff like that, or even if they don't, I would imagine they should. And for that sort of response to come from them, I was a bit taken back, you know.
Well, it's almost like, I suppose, a microcosm of what's going on all around the world when it comes to banking and state and corporations and that kind of thing. You take a company like the Lotto, for example, and while on one hand they'll do a lot of good work, on the other hand they almost seem to negate that work or do worse by dealing with people who are part of the control system or whatever it might be. If you look at, say, the House of Rothschild in banking, on one hand, going back in history, they will fund, for example, one side, the Nazis in World War II. On the other hand, they will fund the Allies. And why do they do it? Because at the end of the day, by creating this duality, they profit, and the war machine creates more money and more profit for them. So I always look at things in apparent contradictions or paradoxes like that and take it with a pinch of salt, because I think if somebody, even if an organisation, the public face of it can be seemingly charitable or for good, if behind the scenes the hidden hand is doing something contradictory to that, well, I'd be inclined to ask why, and why is it a hidden hand? Why can't you get it all out there in the open? I'd have to question the motives.
And you're right, and I thought you see, what really surprised me was just the type of response we got, because you're right, I agree with you, there's a hidden hand behind all these large corporations that have huge money going through their books, like the lottery. But having said that, with a company like the lottery who has so much money, you would imagine they would have had a far sharper PR department to handle that.
True. And
give a far more compassionate response. That at least we could have said, well, fair play to them, you know.
Yeah.
Like, even if they said, you know, we're contractually bound and unfortunately, you know, we find this terrible and we must address it in the future. I mean, they could have just gave the usual spin-off PR nonsense. But to get such a cold corporate response was really shocking, I think, you know. Well,
I think it's indicative of where we are with regard to companies and organisations, and indeed...
Well, it is, because, I mean, if that's what they're willing to put on paper, imagine what they're saying privately in the boardroom about Ben Gilroy and his feelings for the people around the country.
Exactly. So to go to the issue of, for example, suicide, because it is a major, major issue in Ireland. I mean, anecdotally, it's... some of the figures that are coming out are up to 600 a year. I mean, you look at all the money being ploughed into road deaths, for example, and that's not to demean road safety campaigns or anything like that, but suicides at the moment are in excess of double that, but we hear nothing about it. So what can people do to empower themselves?
We see a lot of it. I won't mention a name in this particular case, but a young farmer came to me, and his father has a very successful farm business, and he said to me that his father, he had heard him crying on the phone to receivers. You know who they are, okay? Yeah. And he heard them crying to them, asking them not to move in, and please don't move in, and I'll deal with the bank. And remember, this guy had a successful business. He would have got himself out of the trouble. And remember the kindness, the generosity of the Irish people showed to the banks, right? This is like he's trying to remind people. But anyway, they didn't, and they moved in on his place, and his father hung himself.
Right.
Now, this young boy was 18 years of age, right? And I just thought to myself, you know, what a terrible thing to be telling me, you know? And I really felt sorry for him, you know, and helpless for him and everything else. And then to make matters worse, we talk about this cold corporate response, right? He wanted a meeting with the banks because he's a shrewd enough guy, you know, and he's kind of running the business now when the receivers are in, and he's trying to work through the problems and pay the bank off. But he did ask for a meeting with the bank. And the bank asked him, would the family get a spokesperson because they wanted emotions left outside the door.
Wow.
And I just thought, there's the corporate response now. Like, and that's what we should have showed the banks. We should have said, among the Irish people here, we will need one bank. We only need one bank. We're a small little country. We're only the size and population of Manchester. One bank will do us for the time being, and just let every other bank go to the wall. That's what should have happened in this country. Because when you see the way they behave towards these good people who actually produce stuff, I mean, they produce food and they produce, you know, whatever business they're in, they're producing. The banks produce nothing. And for a company that produced nothing to absolutely own everything in the country, I'm thinking, God, what sort of scam did they pull for that? You know, how do they own everything that they can repossess everything and they never go to work, you know, in the sense of work, you know what I mean, like a production work where you actually produce something.
It reminds me almost, sorry to interject, but going back to say penal times, where you had the system of landowners and landlords and serfs. And it's almost like we're looking at a huge, well, not almost, we are looking at a huge transfer of wealth from the many to the few, which will, in a sense, and I know people will start shouting conspiracy theory or whatever. Let them. I'm not really concerned. But
but I don't even have a theory. You know.
Well, it's fact.
Never mind a conspiritual.
Well, that's it. And it's a system of enslavement and empowerment, and it's being done rather than militarily, as we saw in Africa for decades and going right back in history in South America. We're seeing it done economically now in Europe as we look on, or as we look at our TVs and watch X Factor.
Yeah, well, you see, I don't want to get too alarmist for people, but I actually see this as World War III. And you know, and I don't mean that in an alarmist way or stuff like that, but we were always taught that World War III would be fought on computers. And actually, they're right. It is. The only tragedies will probably be suicidal people. You know, the greatest land grab and asset grab has already started.
Yeah.
And I seriously think it's because the euro has already crashed. You know, I genuinely believe that, or at least as we know it has crashed. And they realise it, and the biggest land grab and asset grab to get everything back has already started.
So what can people do, Ben? Because I'm an optimist when it comes to this, and I don't think it's all going to be doom and gloom, but how do you think, or how do people for economic justice think that people can empower themselves so that they don't go off the deep end? Yeah,
well, there's an apathy in this country, and you know, people say to me about the fluoride issue in the water and stuff like that, and you know, I was never one really for buying into that, except for I never really liked the taste of fluoride in water, so we got a reverse osmosis stuff on our tap here, and we got it in about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And since then we do drink a lot of water here in the house, and then when I did a little bit of research, I found that 97% of Prozac is fluoride. Did you know that?
I did know that. This is an issue very close to my heart. Yeah.
So then I did a little bit more research in it, and I don't want people to say, oh, he's one of them conspiracy theorists, because they even sometimes drive me insane, you know. But look, fact is fact. Fluoride is basically a Prozac, and it's in our water because, you know, 97%, I think, some high figure of Europe does not have fluoride in their water.
That's
but it's in ours,
right.
And normally we'd be a rebellious sort of spirit and maybe do it in our water on purpose. I really don't know, and I'm not an expert on it, so I don't want to pretend I am or anything, but there's something that we're all seem to be so apathetic about things. Like, you know, when we call demonstrations, and you'd imagine that people would turn out in their thousands, and you'd be lucky if you got 200 or 300 people out for the most taxing issues. Like, I think we live in exciting times, and you're right, I'm an optimist as well. I see the glass always as half full, and we live in very exciting times, and probably the most exciting times of any of our lives, but also the most important. And like, you still see people are more interested in who's winning X Factor than what's happening outside their windows.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem. So we decided then that maybe demonstrations and stuff like that probably weren't the best way to go. So we said, right, what can we do? Because most people will support you from the armchair. And if you can encourage enough people to come out and vote for you, people trust you and they feel, well, you're the guy and you'll change for the better. Of course, I mean, anybody knows I could be conning everybody too. But I mean, the point is that at some stage you have to trust someone. And, if a guy promises you something and he delivers, great. If he doesn't deliver, and he can still come around to you and say, look, the reason he can't deliver is because they're doing this or that or whatever, then at least you're chipping away at them in the public eye. Also, the reason we brought the court case against the government is we really think that's where we can maybe hit them hard for a small number of people like us. Because what we're basically saying when we go to court for this injunction is that, you have to stop all payments of our sovereign money out of this country where there's no mandate of that until you either call a referendum or we have a full court case about whether the government has the right to do it or not. And we would always say in court that, the balance of convenience lies in favour with not paying out the money. Exactly. Because the government certainly won't be at a loss for paying it out. And they can say to their cohorts in Germany or wherever that, their hands are tied because there's a court case and, until the court case is heard, can't pay any more money out. And I remember when we were in court the first time about this case, I actually said to the judge that it was an unusual case. I said, this is a case that I've never kind of seen before where the plaintiff and the defendants both want the same outcome. Because, now I said it sort of tongue-in-cheek, but I said to the judge that I've heard the government on many occasions saying we don't want to pay back this money. Yeah. And I said, so if that's the defendant's position that they don't want to pay back the money, and the plaintiff's position is they don't want to pay back the money, what's the problem?
Oh, well, what is the problem? Yeah, exactly.
Also that... on Vincent Brown, again, if you look at our website or if you Google, on YouTube, if you do a search, Vincent Brown and bondholders, you'll see on one of his shows, Simon Coveney was on it and Claire Leonard was on it. Claire Daly. Yep. Yeah, Claire Daly, isn't it? Yeah. And she was on it with him and we gave Claire Daly the list of bondholders. Because at the time, if you remember, the government were saying, we don't know who the bondholders are. Do you remember they were spewing this nonsense? Yeah. Okay. Now, the reason for that, a lot of people are saying, sure, why would the government say that? Sure, what difference would it make who they are, who they aren't? Well, I'll tell you the real reason. In 2008, an advisory group came over to Ireland to advise the government on the best way out of the financial mess it found itself in. Actually, the government and the Irish state didn't find itself in any trouble. The banks found themselves in trouble.
Exactly.
And so they called over these experts in finance to give us advice. And I believe the government paid big money for this advice. It certainly wasn't free. But anyway, I knew that on this advisory group you had the likes of the Rothschilds. Yeah. For instance, okay? Now, there lies the crux of the problem. Because when the advice was to bail out the bondholders, if you're in government, you better not list the bondholders, especially if the Rothschilds are on it.
Yeah, because they can't be seen to be bailing themselves out.
We just get duped. Was there a conflict of interest in the advice we got? And of course, that's the truth. I mean, that's why we gave it to Vincent Brown, and you'll see him reading it out, and then he comes to the Rothschilds, and he just says it, and then you'll actually see him looking into the camera and going, Rothschilds, you know what I mean? Yeah. Now, again, forget about conspiracy theories, because this is this nonsense they keep saying. The minute you mention anything, it's like this elephant in the room. Do you know what I mean? And nobody wants to mention the big elephant in the room, because the minute you say it, everybody goes, conspiracy theorists. No, yeah. I'm not. I'm not. But the fact is, the Rothschilds were on the advisory group that came to Ireland, and we paid big money for advice, and they're also on the bondholders list. Major bondholders, probably the major bondholders, along with Goldman Sachs and a few others. And I'm sorry if people think that that's a conspiracy theorist. It's not. It's fact.
Well, it's not. And I think the media are largely responsible for dirtying the term conspiracy theory. And it's become this... Yeah.
I mean, I'm not... I don't even have a theory. I'm not a theorist about anything. I probably am a conspiracy theorist. I actually think that a guy living in the desert wearing some sort of funny pajamas actually did take down the Twin Towers.
Right, okay.
Or is it the other way around? I can't remember. Does that make me a conspiracy theorist or not? Or a realist? I can't remember.
Well, I'll let you decide that for yourself, but the point stands. Yeah. The point stands.
I mean, it's always funny. The BBC reporters could find this guy anytime they wanted for an interview, yet the most intelligent with the sophisticated equipment they all had could never find them.
Exactly.
and I'm the conspiracy theorist, right? Anyway, we digress. So, it's funny, like, as you say, media, but the media is all controlled and everything too, RTE, complete waste of time. I mean, they call themselves a news channel. Please, they'll tell us if there's a death on the road or something like that, but you're not a news channel, I remember he was a good guy. I just can't think of his name in the UK, and it's gone back a while. And I remember he was saying about the papers in England as well, how they were contrived by Maxwell and a few of them. And he said, like, he remembers that the Falkland War was on, and the Belgrano, was that the name of it, that was sunk and stuff like that, and there was other tragedies. And he said, what was the headline in one of the papers? Freddie Starr has ate my hamster.
Well, there you go. That headline itself even spawned a series of comics and computer games, Rockstar Ate My Hamster.
I just remember always this guy talking about the press, like, that this was what was going on in the world, and then this was the headline of the paper.
It really is incredible.
But it is a bit like that here too, like,
It is, and I think there's...
I seen one time, I think when we actually lodged this case a couple of months ago, and I forget what the headline in the paper was. It was something about, what do you call the one, Katie Price had broken up with somebody, the cage fighter or something, And I just looked and I thought to myself, please, don't call yourself a newspaper if you're going to do this nonsense. Like, there's real news happening. We're a small country, and this is the news,
Well, that's it, and I think the problem being for most people, and it's very difficult to blame many people because they don't know any other way, and I would have been the same for a long period of time in my life. But once you do start to kind of look for alternative sources of news, and you do have to be quite diligent in sorting the wheat from the chaff, but you'll develop, I suppose, a certain skill at doing that.
Yeah, I mean, look, you got to put, I keep saying to people, look, you got to put your bullshit filter on as well.
Exactly.
I mean, because you go on the internet and you believe everything that's on that, gee, man, you never sleep at night. So try to remain a bit sensible, but you must know by looking out the window that there's something wrong. And then all the papers all last week were just about that royal that had her tits out. I mean, come on, please,
Yeah, it's amazing.
See, it's that sort of nonsense that drives me insane.
And driving, I think, increasingly people insane, because I've kind of picked up over the last year that there is a slight, certainly amongst younger people. And
I think they are more tuned in fairness. And that's my only hope, my glimmer of hope for the country is that new generation of people coming up will maybe do some good, because somebody put a poster on my Facebook there the other day. I just thought it was great. It just said that due to the recent cutbacks, the light at the end of the tunnel has been switched off.
Poignant.
So hopefully the young people can switch it back on again.
Well, fingers crossed. And moving back to the present, I suppose, Ben, you're very, very active yourself with regard to, I suppose a lot of people will have seen the famous video of you successfully halting the so-called sheriff somewhere in Ireland. So you're very active when it comes to lawfully standing up for people who are being bullied and shat upon from a height by banks and receivers and those who we perceive to be in positions of power. And for anybody who might be in a position like that and worried, would you have any advice that you could give them? How can they empower themselves?
Yeah, well, you see, we try to kind of educate people, and somebody suggested, should we do maybe a day's class somewhere, and it's something we're really looking into. It's about basically, you see, you're never taught your rights in this country, and, anybody who's basically diminishing your rights, you just need to question, and you don't have to do it with bad language or stuff like that. You'll never see us, at least we try our best not to use bad language. I mean, sometimes it just infuriates you so much that you can't help but being passionate. But in general, there's a right way to do it. And when you question these people, they've never been questioned before. And you can see they've never been questioned before. And I keep going back to the trust issue and the trustee. We are the administrators and the beneficiaries of the trust of the state, and the government and these government agencies, be they police or traffic men or whatever you want to call them, they are all trustees of ours, and that's why they're known as public servants. They're the servants of the sovereign people. And somehow, the whole relationship in a matter of and we're a very relatively new state.
Yeah.
So it didn't take us long to absolutely lose the whole thing. I mean, it's like watching, the managing director of coming in, and the window cleaner telling them what to do, and then the window cleaner getting in his nice Bentley and driving off. I mean, we would all look at that and go, that was mad, But yet we accept it every day that when people, just take money off us and put their hand in your pocket for something and invade your home or whatever it might be with absolutely no lawful authority. They might have legal authority, probably too messy to go into. We might do another show about that because you could do a whole show on legal and lawful. But But basically, I keep saying to people, just question your rights. Like, I mean, we put up a clamper video there. I think it's probably taken down now because, I'm not for anarchy, or I'm not for revolt, or I'm not for violence. But what I am for is when someone diminishes your rights, you've got to stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
There's a maxim in law that he who doesn't stand up for his rights has no rights. And I agree with that. I mean, I think that's a good maxim. But it's one that you should know, that should be taught you in school. And also, if you don't know what your rights are, it's very hard to stand up for them.
I agree, because the onus is very much upon the individual, really.
It is, yeah. And that's why another maxim in law would say that ignorance is no defence in the law. Or law will not support someone who slumbers on their rights.
Yeah.
So it is encumbering on everybody to learn what their rights are. And that's why we try to help. And we always say to people, look, if you can't stand up for your rights with a clamper, say, for instance, I mean, there's a guy, you're just minding your own business, you're probably parked outside the court or a hospital because this is where they normally know there's good picking grounds. And what I mean by that is when you go into a court or into a hospital, chances are you don't know how long you're going to be. So you probably put in €2, €3, probably the max you're allowed, and you could be in, your wife might be having a child, or you could be in court in an important case, and then you come out and there's a clamp on your car. And I mean, that's just not right, people. There's somebody infringing on your rights, and it's these corporations that are doing it. And I mean, look at the ticket on the window. It says Dublin Corporation. So, one of the things we did anyway, we came out of court, we were helping someone who was in the fear of losing their home, and we were fighting in the High Court for them. And when we come out, we had a little car and there was a clamp on it. And so we were pushing, there is a little trick you can do with clamps, you push the wheel over the first part of the chain and it loosens the clamp. And although it doesn't come off because it's around I'm not good on cars now, but I think it's called some sort of axis or something, shock absorber or whatever, but it's around that part anyway, so you can't get it off. But what you can do is it loosens the whole clamp that you can get it under the car and you can cable tie it up.
Okay.
So we were doing this and the clamper guy comes along and he says to us, you've been watched on cameras, lads, so he said, you'll have to pay or the police will be called. So rather than get into any sort of hassle or anything, he said, look, we've no money. I said, will you take a promissory note? Right? And he said, no. And, well, I said, that's the only way we can pay right now.
Yeah.
And then my friend Johnny, he had actually a cheque that a solicitor had given him to do something that the solicitor wasn't willing to do, but we did it. It wasn't unlawful, but it probably wasn't legal, if you know what I mean. So there's a big difference there. But
yeah, there is.
Anyway, when you're a barrister or a solicitor, you're sworn to uphold the legal nonsense. So we said, look, we'll give you the solicitor's cheque. It was made out to Johnny, and we said, you can phone up and see if the cheque is bona fide. And he rang his boss, and they wouldn't accept that. What they wanted us to do was pay with a credit card. Now, we don't have a credit card. So what did he want us to do? Did he want us just to walk home, stand in the rain forever? I don't know what they wanted. Do you know what I mean? There's no reason of this kind of impasse of nonsense while you were still even willing to pay them. And I did say to him, look, I'll give you an IOU, because the guy knew who I was. And I said to him, look, I'm an honourable guy. If I give you an IOU for €80, I'll come back in the next couple of days and I'll pay you.
Yeah.
He still wasn't willing to do that. Well, at that stage, I was being honourable and he wasn't. So I said, look, there's nothing else we can do, then we'll see you. So we start cable tying it up, and of course next minute a cop comes along, and in most cases the guards would know me and I know them, and we get on quite well with guards. I mean, I've no problem with a guard.
Yeah.
But this guy was a bit, he just thought he was in command of the whole earth, and, he thought he had all the authority ever given to any man under a hat, and we had to point out that that wasn't the case. So, he got a bit annoyed with us, because he thought that the minute he took out his notebook, we were supposed to shudder and stuff like that. And because we didn't and started asking him questions, he never had that before, So he basically threatened me with that he would do me for interfering with a clamp. Okay, that was the first thing he threatened me with. I asked him, could he quote that law to me? I wasn't aware of it. And, we had a bit of fun with that because he couldn't quote a law of interfering with a clamp, right? So he then got a bit annoyed and he told me, because my friend Johnny was rolling the car back and forth and we were cable tying it up, and Johnny said, we're nearly ready to go now, we're nearly ready to go. And the guard said to me, if you drive off of that, he says, I'll do you for theft, right? So because I said to him, do you know much about larceny? Because I said, you'd have to prove that at no time did we offer payment. And I said, that camper guy there said I offered him payment on 3 different locations with 3 different instruments. And I said, secondly, I said, they have attached their product to our automobile. We don't want it. We've told them take it back. And I said, how could that be theft? So at that stage, Johnny was saying, come on, Ben, come on, I'm ready to go. And we were saying to the guard, are we free to go? Are we under arrest or are we free to go? Because you can't have it both ways. It's one or the other. If you drive off and that, he says, I'll do you for dangerous driving. And I just said, while I'm here talking to you on a footpath. And with that, he just turned and he just walked off, and he was fuming. I'd say if he could have done us for anything, he would have given us 6 months. But the idea that I know them clamp videos and stuff that we put up are frivolous,
Yeah.
And people think we're putting them up to take the piss out of the police. Honestly, folks, we don't do that. We respect the guards, and they do have a difficult job and all that, But at the same time, sometimes they bring the difficulties upon themselves. Because, look, that was a private contractual arrangement between us and the clamper, us and the corporation. Okay, yeah. It was a civil matter, and it didn't involve Gardaí. The Gardaí were standing there wasting their time when some old lady might have been mugged further up the road.
But furthermore, Ben, they're not entitled to get involved then if it's a civil matter, presumably.
Of course. Well, that's what we tried to point out to him, but he just thought that, he worked for the corporations, and that's why you'll see me in one of the other videos. I actually said to a guard, what corporation are you working for today, officer? Yeah. And he still didn't get it. They don't get it. Or maybe they do get it, but maybe they're just told, look, this is your job and this is what you do. Mm-hmm. So the whole relationship has gone wrong. And that's why, I actually said to a policeman one time when he was getting a bit aggressive at me, I said, look, I respect the police. I said, and you should respect people who respect you, because there's very few of us left. And I do see that in society, that we don't respect the police enough. And then people are saying, oh, but look what you do. And I'm saying, but I'm not doing that to disrespect police. I think we should respect police, but we should do it when they are doing the proper job. Yeah. And we should remind them when they're not doing the proper job. And it's as simple as that. I mean, there was no breach of peace. There was nobody threatened. There was no damage. There was no criminal damage. There was nothing going on. It was just a pure civil matter. We couldn't pay. We had to go. Simple. If they wanted their stuff back, they could have just taken it off. And, that's it. But the reason I'm putting up the video, people say, why do you put it up on YouTube? The idea of that is that with so many people in trouble now with receivers, and with banks threatening to take their homes and people being suicidal, what we're trying to educate the people to do is that if you don't stand up for your rights with even a clamper, if you're too nervous to do that with even a clamper or a guard or whatever it might be, you will have no hope when you go to the High Court. Because the problem is in the High Court is when you go into the High Court, the whole thing is designed for intimidation. Yeah. The judge sitting up high and they speak a funny language called legalese, and they wear wigs and gowns and they bow and it's religious and and it's designed for you to shit yourself when you go in. That's the whole makeup of it. And so, if you're losing your home or business, right, you do not have the €20,000, €25,000 required for a barrister. Yeah. And there is no free legal aid. I don't know if people know that listening, but there's no free legal aid for you. And also in civil courts, you are presumed guilty. There's a presumption of guilt rather than innocent. You have to prove yourself innocent.
So you're on hiding to nothing.
Sorry? Yeah, absolutely. Because if you don't even show up, they get what's called a default judgment because you didn't come in to prove your innocence, so you were guilty. See? So there's huge things against you here, and these are commercial courts, and of course the god of the commercial court is the bank. The bank write these banking acts and banking laws and all. They're written by the banks and signed off by the Minister of Finance. So the whole thing is set up to get whatever it is they want off you. So, you know, I had a man come down to me from Monaghan, and he was under threat of the sheriff coming to take us home. And I said to him, but did you go to court? And he said, no. He said, because I was never in court in my life then, not even for a parking ticket. And he said, I wouldn't be able to go to the High Court or know what to say. I mean, the whole system is wrong anyway. And then the more I thought about that, I was thinking to myself, this man was a builder. And you know, when you shook his hands, little hard hands on him, you knew he was a worker all his life, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, this guy now is in a chance of losing his home. And all the taxes that he has paid all through his life, okay? Say you see a little scumbag and he robs an L1 of our handbag and injects her, you know, with a syringe or whatever to get her handbag, right? When that guy is caught by the police, the state will provide him with whatever legal team he wishes.
Yeah.
And if he's not even happy with them during the case, he can sack them and get another legal team, okay? And this is paid for by the taxes of, say, the likes of this builder, right?
Yeah.
And yet when this guy is in court for losing his home, the state give him nothing. He has to either speak for himself or just give up his home. Now, there's something inherently wrong with that. Again, maybe it's me. Maybe I just have this sense of fairness that's off the scales.
No, it's
but
not
I'm
just
hoping
you.
that I'm like-minded people agree with me. I mean, I just think it's crazy.
It is crazy, and you mentioned a word, and it's an extremely powerful word. That's fear, because I think fear is the driving force behind the whole system that we're talking about. Whether it's talking to a guard or a policeman, whether it's standing in the High Court, or whether it's something on a much simpler level altogether. People are really driven by fear, and until that fear can be removed, people aren't in a position to stand up for themselves, I believe. And I think the system is designed in exactly that way.
Yeah, it is. And you see, the fear will really only go through the education of your rights.
Yeah.
And you know what your rights are. Like, if you were eating an apple and somebody just walked up to you and just hit the apple out of your hand, you know, you get real annoyed about it, and you'd fight that guy, you know, and maybe kick him in the arse or something, because you knew he didn't have the right to do that.
Yeah.
See? And it's about educating. And once you know what your right is, when someone diminishes your right, Irish people are good fighters. The problem is we don't know what our rights are.
So we don't know how to fight.
Yeah, well, you don't know how to fight. If you thought somebody was doing something wrong on you, and this is the way you should fight it, you will do it. But, you know, we were brought up, and you know, maybe our parents are to blame, but, you know, they were doing it for the right reasons. But we were taught to respect all these institutions. You know, we were taught to respect guards, and I still teach my children that. But at the same time, I'm not going to have a guard diminish any of my children's rights.
Of course.
But at the same time, if I see a guard in trouble, I would be the first to jump in and help him. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, but we were taught to respect all these institutions, like the banks, the church, the legal system. You know, we were taught to respect all these, and every one of them is literally screwing us. You know, and it's because of, you know, we respected them without the knowledge of knowing when they overstepped the mark. Or you couldn't question them. Like my parents used to tell me that you couldn't question a priest. You can't ask him that. You can't say that to a priest. You can't ask him, you know, where does God live? Or you just couldn't answer a question, like, you know.
Yeah.
And that was the problem, I suppose, from my father's time. My father, you know, probably left school early, and they weren't really from a rebellious sort of generation, you know, like from people born in the 60s and onwards would have been. But my parents would have been born in the 30s, so, you know, they were not a rebellious age, and they grew up through wars, so, you know, they grew up at ration books, so when they got an extra apple, they thought it was Christmas time. So you see, like, we come from a different generation now, and that's probably not a bad thing, because young people today, you know, if you educate them on the rights, you won't stop young people in this country.
Yeah.
Because there's nobody will diminish their rights once you tell them what their rights are, and that's what we hope to do.
So, Ben, if people want to get in touch, or if they feel that they would like to empower themselves and learn more about their rights, and let's face it, we all should, But if people really feel that they want to do that, how should they go about it, or what can they do? Can they get in touch with People for Economic Justice, or is there any other outlet for them?
Yeah, I mean, People for Economic Justice is probably good in the sense that if they're interested in doing a course or something like that, we'll probably run a course on what we call common law, because your common law rights are really terrific, you know. Because you don't need like Bill of Rights or any of this. You don't need it written down. Just because it's in the Bill of Rights doesn't mean it gave you that right. It's merely listing rights you already had. Even the Constitution. Constitution doesn't give you rights. It merely mentions some that you have. Like when I sign letters, I always put all rights reserved at the bottom.
Yeah.
I don't diminish any of my rights. So why should I? I mean, and as I keep saying, I'm not anti-government or I'm not pro-revolution or any of that stuff. But I am for your rights and standing up for your rights. And everybody should do that.
And the more people actually empower themselves with their rights and educating themselves in that sense, the easier it gets as people go along, and the more they realise that it's really just a case that everything is a game, and that's not now to belittle anything, but it is a game. And unless you know, for example, if you for the first time go to play a game of chess and you're playing Garry Kasparov, the grand chess master, and you don't know the rules of chess, you're going to be eaten alive. You haven't a hope. And that's the system that we're living in at the moment. We are the guys, or most people, they don't know the rules of the game, whereas the solicitors, barristers, or people who are ingrained in the system, judges, whoever it might be, they do know the rules, so obviously they're going to gobble up the ordinary person. Whereas if you do know the rules, they're not expecting you to, and you then have the upper hand because you have the element of surprise, and you can use the very rules that they have set out against them.
Oh yeah, you can beat them with a stick. And you see, the beauty about this is it's all non-violent. It actually is not even as it's non-violent, it's empowering, and it's only words. That's why they say the sword or the pen is mightier than the swords, because, you know, it really is. It's all just words. Once you know the right words, that's all you need. You don't need to tell people you have to F off and blah, blah, blah. But I see that, you know, anger in young people, you know, when they get annoyed with a clamper or whatever, you know, they be calling you foreign this and you dissy this. And, you know, you're actually, because you're only annoying yourself and they're actually laughing at you, you know, and they're antagonizing you even more. And when you actually know the right words and actually how to do it, it's actually much easier. That's why if you listen to my phone call that we recorded with one of the clamper companies, I don't know if you heard it.
I did.
It was funny because I was very calm, and you'll see this guy, it was like I felt from Mars that he was talking to. Like at several times during the phone conversation, he kept saying, let me get this straight, you know, and then he kept saying, no, you don't understand, he kept saying to me. And it was like this Martian had arrived on his table and he was trying to explain the rules to him, and he just couldn't guess it, that if he could make up figures, like he just pulled, say, oh, if I remove the clamp, there'll be a €560 fine. You know, now, the way I look at that is that's a figure he just pulled out of his arse, or somebody did in his company, right? And because he's obviously trained in a certain way and gets his wage on Friday, he assumes that this must be the most powerful job in the world. And he couldn't believe that a guy like me could just phone him up. And I could just pull a figure out of my arse as well. So I came back with, I'm going to charge you €200 a day storage for the clamp. And you can see, like, you know, he was a good guy, don't get me wrong. The guy was a very nice guy. But I would love to have watched him on camera. I mean, I would have actually paid for that, because I'd say his head was spinning. You know, I would love to have seen his facial expressions, because even by the way he was speaking, he was just like amazed that somebody could be. And he kept saying, no, you don't understand. Or, you know, he was so flabbergasted by it. And the same with the receiver video still up on YouTube, when the receiver comes to take back a premises. And again, he was a great character, you know. Yeah. But you can see the minute we say stuff to him, the guy nearly goes into this sort of tizzy, like, you know. and even with the video you mentioned with the sheriff, you can clearly hear the sheriff saying that I have been doing this job 37 years and no one ever questioned me.
And that's exactly it. It's the power of questions, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I always think about my poor parents who are dead now, and I always think that if the sheriff was coming with 2 guards, they would have just handed up everything. Even if they weren't in trouble with the bank.
Yeah.
You know, if the sheriff said he was coming to take your stuff and the guards were with him, once they seen him turning up, they would have just handed the keys, even if they weren't in bank debt.
And I think a lot of people are still like that.
Yeah, actually, look, we meet them every day of the week. You see, I don't know if you've seen the RT report with Seamus Sherlock and that.
I have, yeah.
It was a bit of a hatchet job, and they gave all these figures that, it's only 1% and thing, and it's 20 times worse in the north. But in actual fact, you see, what RT are hiding there is that they don't class them as repossessions when people out of fear hand back the keys because the sheriff is threatening to come.
Okay, so they don't count on the official stats.
Yeah, and there's something like 18 handbacks of property every day. And that's far more than the north in repossessions. But because they don't class it that way, and that's what I keep talking about, word magic, you know, always watch word magic and ask exactly what do you mean by that? You know, what do you mean by repossession? So that's why it really annoys me when I hear this bloody nonsense. And then that Brendan Burgess fellow from AskAboutMoney.com, you see what we put up on our site about him?
Yes.
I mean, this guy, you know, he blames everybody in trouble with the banks. You know, if you're in trouble with a bank, it must be your fault. Like, where did he get this guy? And they always wheel him out on RTE. And of course, we have a video up where in 2008, he was advising everyone to buy bank shares, among all things. And he had even said on the documentary to Brian Dobson, he said, people should be filling their shoes with bank shares. Shares were about €7 a share. They're not even 7 cents a share now. And maybe these people in trouble actually listened to him and took his advice.
Yeah, well, I think people, the minute they hear anyone on RTE or whether people who claim to be economists because they have a piece of paper, they need to just close their ears.
Look, they keep wheeling out these guys, though, you know, and they never let me on with them, you know, because I would have just told Brendan Burgess straight, sure, were you not the guy that told people to fill their shoes with bank shares? So maybe that's why they're in trouble, you idiot, Jim, would you get off the station?
Exactly.
I mean, it's such fun. Just on a serious note, I actually forgot to mention to you, and I want to send my condolences to the family. I heard some terrible news there just yesterday that, I don't know if you remember the guy where the sheriff broke into the house in Beaumont.
Yes.
And the chap took a heart attack on the floor.
Yes.
His sisters were in financial difficulty too, and one of them took her life yesterday. So, yeah. You know, and of course, you see, I was talking to a bank manager who I meet regularly. He's like an agony ant that goes around and he meets people in trouble and he agony ants them basically with bullshit, and then it's passed on to the next stage of solicitors. But he told me out straight that 7 people on his round committed suicide. And he said to me, Ben, I can't say that they committed suicide because of financial difficulties. And neither can I, obviously.
Yeah.
Unless they leave a note saying it's because of financial difficulties, you know. But what he did say to me is that I can tell you that we're in financial difficulties.
Yeah.
And I think that's the shame that we have in this country, you know, because we're proud people, you know. And that's the problem sometimes we have as a group going around trying to help people, is that probably the people who really need the help aren't saying it, you know.
Well, that's it. And as you say, it is the great shame of this country, and it's something that has to change. And you've given a number of reasons, the main one being self-empowerment and self-responsibility and how people can step up to the mark and try to remove some of that fear that really has people cowering in corners all over the country at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we help people fight in court. And what we do is we help them drag the court case for years through the court, costing hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
You see? And if we can do that with everybody, the whole idea of bringing someone to court becomes just not attractive proposition whatsoever, because your house is probably worth 180,000, and if you meet up with Ben Gilroy, he can drag it through the High Court and the Supreme Court and everything else and completely mess the system and everything. If I can drag it up to be $500,000 in legal fees, well, should they know they're not going to get it off you? Should they make you homeless, what are they going to do? Come after you for $500,000 in legal fees? That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense. And I think if there's one piece of advice maybe for anybody who might be receiving a summons through the door or whatever, if it's a summary summons, do your utmost to change that into a plenary case so that you can clog up the courts and actually defend yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we show them how to do that as well, you know.
Well, Ben, tell us about the website. You've got a mailing list there as well, so how can people subscribe to that and get more information?
They just sign on. I don't think there's much even to fill in. I'm not one of these techie guys. We have a very good guy called Ferdia down in Waterford who runs our websites free of charge for us. And we have a lot of good people around the country who donate to the site and who give up time to us free, and who... Yeah. I had a guy donate a car to me because he knew I had no car to get around the country. Now, it was only a little banger, don't get me wrong, and I'm most thankful to him. Yeah. But, like, you know, just that sort of generosity that you get from people, or people coming up into the street. Like, I had a man, right, come up to me, and I don't want to be disrespectful to him, but he didn't look like he had a lot of money, if you know what I mean. Okay. You know, a very nice guy. And he came up to me and gave me a tenner towards the cause, he said. And I just thought that was amazing, because, you know, I'm sure it was probably half of what he had in his pocket, you know. And I just thought, you know, it's encouraging that when you see a guy who probably didn't have much himself giving you nearly half of what he has, there's a lot to be said for that.
There absolutely is. That's the human side of it, and I think that's what needs to be nurtured. And forget about these faceless, nameless corporations, because they're... Yeah, but that's what I mean. You have a guy like that, and he just comes up to you. Like, we were just coming through town with my wife and my mother-in-law, and this guy was just talking to me, and then when I walked on to my husband, I said, "Who's that?" And I said, "That guy just gave me a tenner towards helping us with what we're doing, you know." Yeah. And my wife goes, "You didn't take it on him, did you?" And I said, "Well, he gave it to me. He wanted to give it to me." I said, "He looked like he could have done with it." You're missing the point. Yeah.
You know, like, you know, he wanted to give it, you know. I didn't want to insult him then and not take it, because he really wanted to give it, you know. And I just thought there's just something great about that moment. Not that, look, if people have donated on our website €100 and stuff like that, you know, and they're all terrific, but just that moment when I actually met the guy face to face, you know, there was just something magical in that moment. I think it defined a lot of what's in the country today as well.
Well, that's it, and it's the humanity that people need to focus on. And I mean,
of course, I mean, there's businessmen around the country who've given us offices in different parts of the country. Like, we've an office here in Trim where we meet with people in trouble and stuff like that, and that office was just donated to us. The phones are paid, the electricity is paid, the guy never asked us for a cent, you know. He doesn't ask us to do anything for him. He doesn't ask us, you know, he doesn't ask us to lobby, or, you know, he's not looking for anything. He just likes what we're doing. It's a fair play to you. I have an office there sitting going to waste. He said, if somebody wants to rent it, he said, I might ask you to leave, but right now it's sitting there doing nothing, and you're entitled and welcome to it.
Well, that's extremely encouraging to hear. And I think as time goes on, we'll hear more and more of these stories, because something has to give somewhere along the way, and people are slowly but surely, I think, realising that they're not beholden or at the behest of faceless corporations. It is about humanity, and people need to, I suppose, foster that human spirit as time goes on.
Yeah, and it does, like, for someone like me who always seems to be fighting the system, you know, and at times you feel like you're on your own doing it, and you sometimes wonder, God, am I doing the right thing, or I just look after me and my own family, you know, because it's hard, and it does get in on you. And then when you're in fighting in court for these people, you know, you take a lot on yourself personally, you know. Yeah. And I do have headaches, and, you know, you're waking up at night thinking about something. Did I do the affidavit right for him? Did I fight it right in the court for him? You know, am I leading him down the right path? Or, you know, you take a lot of responsibility on yourself, and sometimes, you know, some days you have low days where you just feel like I'm going to give up. And as I say, that's the day then where a fella comes up and just gives you a car. Yeah. You know, no, don't get me wrong, it was a banger of a car, but, like, it was just the gesture of it. Like, here's a car that, Ben, I'm not really using it, and I know you don't have one for going around the country, so here, you know. And it was an old Merc, you know, but it was just terrific, like, to get it, because myself and Johnny and that, we could drive to Cork in a bit of comfort, you know. There was a guzzler and stuff, but still, like, you know, it's just a moment like that. It wasn't the car, it was the action of giving it and recognising of what we were doing. And that then is a day where you really feel then, oh, no, you're obviously doing the right thing, or at least other people recognise what you're trying to do, even if you're doing it wrong. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm great or I'm doing it the right way, but it's just the recognition sometimes that, you know, there, I recognise what you're doing, and I like it. A man come up to me on Sunday, I just happened to be in town with my kids, and, you know, when you're with your kids and all, you forget that people may know you, you know. So I was just getting off the dart with my kids, and we were just going for a walk around town, and this old man was getting on the dark station, and I thought he was giving out to me because I wasn't minding my daughter properly, because I turned and grabbed her by the arm because she tends to run off when we were on the Lewis tracks and that, you know.
Yeah.
And he comes up to me and goes, you know, and it was really like kind of aggressive, you know. And then he says, well done, you. And that's all he said, and he got on the dart, or on the Lewis, and I just seen him travelling off in the distance. Then I standing there with my mouth open, because he didn't say, well done, you what, or, you know, and his manner was aggressive, if you know what I mean. He could have very easily been given out some before I actually heard what he said. So you have funny incidents like that too, and then you feel great, and I don't mean that in a big-headed way or anything, but you know, sometimes you have down days as well, and when you lose in court, or you get, like quite often we get ripped in court, and I'm not a sore loser. I mean, the other day we lost in court, and I have to say the judge was a very, very fair judge. You know, really, really fair judge, gave us a good hearing and everything. And in the end, I kind of agreed with him, to be honest. But, you know, a very fair judge, but, you know, they're like hen's teeth as well, I got to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had judges change court rules and everything on us. And remember, we're just what's known as lay litigants, you know, outside the church, you know, so we're lay people.
Yeah. Well, Ben, the work that you're doing is to be highly commended, and I would recommend that everybody check out peopleforeconomicjustice.com. There are similar movements springing up, and I don't like to use the word movement because it's not necessarily a political thing. It's just about self-empowerment, but it's happening all over the world now, particularly in the US, where people are really, we don't hear much about it in the media, but the situation is very, very bleak economically over there as well. It's not all Disney World and presidential elections, as we would be led to believe. And I would like to thank you for coming on to Alchemy Radio and talking in such depth with me, Ben. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Sure, thanking you, and to all your folks, watch this space, and maybe, you know, when we're bringing the government to court, come in and watch maybe a moment in history, because I think we can get a lot of supporters into the court. It does change the atmosphere within the court, because remember, we're asking the court to go against their paymaster, because the paymaster is in the dock, and that's always going to be a difficult situation.
Well, we'll certainly speak to you again closer to the time and rally the troops, so to speak.
That's it.
Ben, it's been great. Thank you very much.
No bother. See you, folks. Bye-bye.
Alchemy Radio.
Alchemy Radio. Alchemy Radio. Alchemy Radio. I've got the power. I've got the power. Hey, yeah.
Like the turn of the whip, I snap attack, front to back, in this thing called rap. Feeling like a double rhyme double on a heavily level. Back to base, turn up the double. Blast on my day and night all the time. 714, live the line. Maniac, radiac, winning the game. I'm the lyrical Jesse James. Quality, I possess, don't say I'm fresh. When my voice goes through the rest of the microphone that I am holding. Copywritten lyrics on the can't be stolen if they all snap. Don't need the police to try to save them. Your voice is sick, so please stay off my back, or I will attack, and you don't want that.